Yep. It's that time, baby. It is that time for another whoa episode. Artofkickz. We is in here. Give me a moment, y'all. I'm trying to sort through some things right quick before we get this party all the way started. Just bear with me a minute. I do apologize, but we're about to get this thing rocking and rolling. We got two Mr. Ballin videos that we will be checking out here tonight. And I'm looking forward to it. I am looking forward to it. Hold on, y'all. Y'all about to see a change in the chat real quick. I do apologize, but it's a necessary. It's a necessary. Boom. Boom. Hold on. I'm doing something. Boom. I just changed the game. With the chat. Yep. Donnie. Yep. No more of that. Sucker. What up, AOK Mafia? It's your boy Artofkickz, and just like that, we back with another one. So, as promised, I was giving my channel members a live reaction, a channel member chat only live reaction. Hell, we celebrating like 800 channel members. Shout out to you guys. We are on the road to 1,000 supporters, 1,000 channel members. Not that my regular subscribers aren't, but channel members, y'all a little special. Y'all a little special. You know what I'm saying? You know what I'm saying? So the chat is lit up right now. Channel members only. Channel members only. I asked you guys in a poll on the community tab what I should react to for channel members only live stream. And a bunch of you guys suggested Mr. Ballin. So Mr. Ballin it is. We got two. Count it. Two Mr. Ballin videos tonight. This first one is one of my favorites from him. Top 3 stories that sound fake but are 100% real. This is part 14. We're going to check this out. Then I got another to follow. And then if need be, we'll do a funny reaction at the end. A try not to laugh type of reaction at the end. If we need it. If not, we're just going to go ahead and get up out of here. But anyway, we're here. We're live and I'm ready to get this party started. Y'all boys and girls ready? Again, this is top 3 stories that sound fake but are 100% real. Mr. Ballin. Let's get it. 300 people, let's go.
Apologies in advance for my nasally voice. I've had some pretty bad allergies over the last couple of days, and it just hasn't cleared up yet. Sometimes the truth is stranger than fiction, and today we're going to look at 3 stories that demonstrate that. But before we get into today's stories, if you're a fan of the strange, dark, and mysterious delivered in story format,
thank you, King Cole. Thank you, Dominic.
We do, and we upload
$15, $5 donos. Appreciate y'all. Eric, thank you for the $5 donos. Sabrina, appreciate it.
Sandwich, and when they say yes, proceed to pack the biggest bite possible. In
Matt Berry, new channel member. Thank you.
Turn on all notifications so you don't miss
Team
any of our
A-OK,
weekly
baby.
uploads. All right, let's get into today's stories.
Shout out to my moderators. I see y'all in here. What up, Yanni? What up, Jessica? What up, Mary? Channel members, baby.
People who live on Andover Street on Detroit, Michigan's east side will be the first to tell you that the area is known for constant drug activity. On Thursday, November 9th, 2017, 2 Detroit Special Operations police officers began an operation known as a push-off on Andover Street. A push-off is when undercover cops pretend to be drug dealers, and then when customers come up to them and try to buy drugs, they arrest them and seize their vehicles. These particular officers that would be doing...
Yeah, I feel like someone could do that so easily and very, very often, these undercover cops.
This push-off had been undercover for some time in the area, and so they had a local drug house they used for these types of operations. At some point that day, 2 potential customers came up to the fake drug house. They knocked on the door, and the undercover police officers opened up. They invited them inside, and then once these customers were inside sitting down, they asked the undercover cops if they could buy some drugs. And as soon as the cops heard this, they whipped out their badges, they drew their guns, and they ordered them on the ground. But these potential customers, they didn't get on the ground. Instead, they whipped out their badges and drew their guns, and they said, no, you get on the ground. Because it would turn out these customers were actually undercover police officers too, but they were from a different precinct, and so neither groups had any idea about the other. They had no clue that they were both undercover at the same time. Both sets of undercover cops were so surprised by what was happening that instead of firing shots at each other, they just stayed in this really tense standoff, like that famous scene from The Office where they're all pointing guns at each other and they're trying to figure out who the double agent is.
Oh my God. Wait a minute. So, two sets of undercover cops trying to do the same thing, which is expose some, people that are selling drugs or buying drugs, discover that one another are undercover cops, and instead of being like, okay, putting the guns down and showing each other badges just, for proof, they just is like, oh, dang, what do I do? I'm going to keep aiming my gun at this undercover cop. What? That doesn't make a whole lot of sense to me.
And so the police are doing that, periodically hurling insults and threats at the other side in an attempt to get them to stand down. But when neither side stood down, they all just eventually lowered their guns and then proceeded to beat the living crap out of each other. After the dust finally settled and all the haymakers had stopped, the two groups...
These are dummies, bro. These cops are dummies. How you gonna sit there like, okay, just start fighting each other? What? These are ignorant. Look, man. Natalie, thank you. New channel member. I done seen you in the comments a few times. Artofkickz, I see you up in here, baby. Thank you. Appreciate you. Thank you for the don't know. From Chicago. Appreciate it. Michael, thank you so much.
Groups of police realized their mistake and apologized to each other. Luckily, none of the officers were badly hurt from this mix-up. However, two officers did have to go to the hospital, but for very minor injuries. One had a black eye and the other had a split lip. While Detroit's own chief of police and the media and the public at large have all come out and said this snafu was a total embarrassment, others have said the officers involved might deserve a little bit of credit, because after all, their job was to be undercover, and apparently they were so good at being undercover that they didn't even know the other group was undercover too, and vice versa. So perhaps they were just too good at their jobs.
I would give them that. Okay, they did a good job of being undercover. But in the moment where they said, freeze, this is the police, and showed their badges, that moment they should have realized, oh, wait, he's on my side. And maybe while they're pointing guns at each other to mouth off who their sergeant is, what precinct they're with, like, give some evidence to show that you're really a police officer. You know what I'm saying? Because I'm pretty sure there's certain stuff that y'all know as cops that a regular civilian, especially a drug dealer or even a drug buyer, wouldn't necessarily know. Maybe I'm wrong.
You be the judge.
Thank you, Emily.
The following story was pulled from a 1997 article in the British Medical Journal. The article was written by the psychiatrist who treated the patient who will be the focal point of this story. The only reason I bring this up is because this story truly sounds made up, and it's not. One night in the winter of 1984, a healthy middle-aged woman, who we'll call Brenda for this story, was at her home in London reading a book when she suddenly heard a voice in her head. It said,
"Please don't be afraid. I know this must be shocking for you to hear me speaking to you like this, but this was the easiest way I could think of.
What?
My friend and I, we used to work at the Children's Hospital, and we would like to help you."
Brenda...
What? How she's just gonna hear a voice in her head say all that? And they gonna say that this is the easiest way we could contact you. No, what? Ain't never.
couldn't believe what was happening. She had never heard voices in her head before, and this voice that was speaking to her, it was so clear, and it did not sound like any voice she had heard before. And so at first, Brenda just sat on the couch and didn't do anything and just waited, hoping that maybe she was just imagining this. But the voice in her head seemed to pick up on her reaction and said,
Brenda, this is not a hallucination. We're real and we want to help you.
Brenda did not believe it was real. She believed she had just lost her mind. And so for the rest of the night,
I'm tripping because Mr. Ballin started this story off saying that this story doesn't sound real, but it's 100% real. What the fuck?
she just completely ignored the voice in her head, and first thing the next morning, she went to her doctor's office and said, please help me. The doctor referred her to a psychiatrist, and so she went over to the psychiatrist's office, and after they performed an evaluation of Brenda, they said, look, I don't really know why you're hearing these voices. There's no clear medical explanation for why. And so Brenda was ultimately diagnosed with something called functional hallucinatory psychosis, which basically means Brenda was hallucinating, but there was no clear reason why. The psychiatrist began treating Brenda with an antipsychotic drug as well as with supportive counseling. Over the next couple of weeks, as Brenda diligently took her medications and went to her appointments, the voices eventually stopped.
You a fool, DJ. You a fool. Says, I wish a voice in my head would.
So Brenda went into her psychiatrist's office and she said, Doc, you saved me. The voices are gone. I'm so happy. And the psychiatrist would later recall that Brenda was visibly relieved. It was obvious that she was not making this up, that she really believed that she had these voices and now they were gone. And so after Brenda left the office, she actually went on vacation with her family outside of London just to celebrate the fact that she had not, in fact, lost her mind. But while she was away on holiday, she started hearing the voices again. And this time, they told her she had to get back to London as soon as possible because there was something terribly wrong with her. And they gave her a very specific street address that she was supposed to go to seek treatment. And so
this is very fascinating because the woman on the surface level seems to be okay. You know, she's had these weird voices in her head, but she's like, I'm glad the voices are gone. Let me go on vacation. She seems to be okay on the surface level. She was sitting there reading a book, and then boom, these voices came out of nowhere. Rose Whitney, I'm glad to hear it. Thank you for being a channel member.
Brenda is horrified that the voices are back in the first place, but what she's really scared about is that maybe there's some truth to what these voices are telling me. Maybe there is something wrong with her. And so Brenda ran to her husband and she explained what happened, and he was very reassuring and said, look, honey, you should just totally ignore the voices again. There's probably nothing wrong with you. Just try to relax and have a nice vacation. But Brenda could not relax. She could not ignore the voices because they were constantly telling her,
you need to leave. You need to go back. There's something wrong with you.
And so finally, Brenda convinced her family to end the vacation early, and they headed back to London. And as soon as they got there, Brenda made her husband come with her, and they drove to the street address the voices had given her. And when they got to this very specific location, they found themselves standing in front of the brain scan unit of a London hospital. Brenda and her husband were totally shocked, but before they could even react to what they were looking at, the voices in Brenda's head came back, and they told her,
you need to go inside and you need to request a brain scan for 2 reasons. 1, there's a tumor in your brain. And 2, this tumor is causing your brainstem to swell.
At this point, Brenda was so scared that
Whoa, that is so specific. The voice in her head said there's a tumor in your head, and this tumor is, oh my God. Like, that is so specific of a thing to say. It's almost as if Brenda wouldn't have a thought like that of her own. You know what I mean?
this information might actually be true, that despite what her husband was saying, she went right inside the brain scan unit and she requested the scan. And when they asked her, you know, who's the doctor that referred you over here, she said, I don't have one. And then she ultimately told them that, well, there are voices in my head that told me to come over here and get this scan. Now, the doctors at the brain scan facility were not totally like, get out of here, but instead they said, look, this is a very expensive scan. We can't just let you in here and get a scan because the voices told you to. We need a clinical reason to do it. We need a doctor's note saying you need this scan. And so they turned Brenda away, and Brenda now is just a complete wreck. She ends up calling her psychiatrist, and she explains the situation about getting this address and being told to get this brain scan.
I mean, that's another thing too, is so specific. Like, did she not know that that place was already there prior for the voice to tell her, hey, you need to go to this address? Like, how would she know what that facility was? Oh my goodness, this is crazy. This is crazy. Candy Shy, new channel member. Thank you, baby. We're here.
And after a few minutes of hearing her story, her psychiatrist says, okay, you know what? I will call over and I will get you an appointment to get a brain scan because I want you to be at ease. And it seems like this is probably the only way we're going to be able to do that. And so after this conversation, the psychiatrist got in touch with this hospital and he requested the brain scan for Brenda. And about a month later, Brenda went in, she had the scan done, and sure enough, she had a brain tumor and her brainstem was swollen. The doctors couldn't believe it because Brenda was showing absolutely no signs of having this condition.
She actually had a brain tumor, and her brain stem was actually swollen. I think that was what he said. What? That's insane. She showed no symptoms, and the voice was right. What?
And so they told her that, well, you know, you can just wait and see what happens. This might not have any effect on you. Huh? And so you can just wait to see if you get symptoms eventually. Okay. Or we can go in and do the surgery and remove this tumor. But of course, doing brain surgery comes with some very significant risks. After thinking it...
Oh my God, I pray that I would never, ever, ever need brain surgery. Hell, I don't want any surgery for that matter. And I pray the same for you all. I hope y'all never, ever have to have brain surgery. Woo!
Over with her family, Brenda decided to go with immediate surgery. And after telling her doctors as much, the voices in her head told her that she had made the right decision.
Oh, see, look, I don't know, man. I feel like at this point, if I had voices in my head that told me something like that, and I was able to get a brain scan and get verification that I did have a tumor and it was pushing up against my brain stem, causing it to swell. If the voices are telling me to get surgery, guess what? I'm getting surgery done. Even with the complications that can come with brain surgeries and how scary and potentially, you know, life-changing that it can be, I would do it. And she didn't even have symptoms. Think about that. Think about you and I, as we are healthy as we think we are, finding out that we have something going on in our brain that is causing us to potentially need some type of surgery, and we don't feel sick. She's not even getting headaches. She just has a voice in her head.
A couple of days later, Brenda went in and her surgery was a huge success. After she regained consciousness in the recovery room, the voices spoke to her. They said,
"We are pleased to have helped you. Goodbye."
After that,
What? She said even after the surgery, the voices came back and says, "We are pleased to have helped you. Goodbye," as if they're never coming back again. No way. This can't be real.
that Brenda never heard the voices ever again.
What?
And she never had any complications from the surgery or from the tumor. And to this day, the medical community still has no idea who those voices in her head really were.
What? No freaking way. No freaking way. That actually happened. That's a real story. This woman, oh my God. Who are those voices? Was that God? Was that our Lord and Savior, Jesus Christ? Like, who was the voice? And why, what's so special about her that the voice came to her to save her? What is she meant to do with her life? Who is she meant to become? That's amazing.
Michael Packard might be the luckiest or unluckiest person alive. In 2001, when Michael was 38 years old, he was on a flight over Costa Rica when the small plane he was on crashed. The pilot, co-pilot, and a passenger were all killed on impact, but Michael and the 4 other passengers, they survived the crash, but they were all left badly injured and stranded in a very remote section of the jungle. The survivors attempted to use the downed plane's radio equipment to send out a distress signal to try to get someone to come out and help them, but they had no way of knowing if anybody was receiving their signal. And so all they could do was just send it out and then wait and hope somebody found them before they all died. And sure enough, 48 hours after crashing, rescuers were able to hack their way deep into the jungle where Michael and the other survivors were, and they were all saved. While Michael was recovering in the hospital, a doctor told him that based on his injuries, he would not have survived another night out in that jungle. The chances of even being in a plane crash are astronomically low.
Yeah.
The odds are about 1 in 5 million, with some places giving odds as low as 1 in 20 million. To put that in perspective, Michael was far more likely to have been struck by lightning, which is about a 1 in 1 million chance, than he was to have been in that plane crash.
Oh, wow.
But that plane crash would not be the last time that Michael defied the odds and did something totally unbelievable. Over the next couple of decades, Michael, who was a commercial diver by trade, would survive not 1, but 2 significant encounters with great white sharks off the coast of California. Some of Michael's friends would not be so lucky. Michael would get lost at sea, like really lost, like treading out in the middle of the ocean with no land in sight for hours lost. But miraculously, a boat would find him and save him again. And Michael would discover the body of a long-time missing person hidden underneath the water about 60 feet down off the coast of Massachusetts. But of all the improbable...
That's insane. Think about this man's life. The things that he's been through and experienced. Wow.
Exploits of Michael's life. None is more unbelievable than what happened to him in 2021, which...
That's this year.
Experts are saying he had about a 1 in 1 trillion chance of experiencing.
1 in 1 trillion?
On the morning of June 11th, 2021, Michael, who was 57 years old at the time, hopped in a boat with his longtime diving partner, Josiah. Once they were all situated and they had all their equipment inside of the boat, they took off and headed for the open waters right off the coast of Cape Cod, Massachusetts, where they planned to do some lobster diving. A popular way to retrieve lobsters is to literally just dive down and by hand pick them up and bring them back to the surface. And so that day, that's what Michael and Josiah planned to do. Once they reached this spot right off the coast, Michael put on all of his scuba diving equipment and hopped in the water. Josiah did not put on any diving equipment because he was not going to be getting in the water for this dive. Instead, he would remain on the boat and help Michael get in and out of the water. He'd pull lobsters up onto the boat, and he was also there in case of an emergency. He could call for help. And so just after 6 a.m., once Michael was in the water and signaled he was good to go, he dove down below, and after a little while, he came back up, but with a relatively small haul of lobsters.
Real quick, y'all, shout out to new channel member, April. Thank you so much. Amber, appreciate it. Thank you for being you as well, sweetheart. Thank you for the $20 dono.
And so the two men figured that, well, I guess today is just not a great day for catching lobsters. But regardless, for the next couple of hours, Michael continued to go down and catch as many lobsters as he possibly could. By 8 a.m., Michael had captured approximately 100 pounds of lobsters that were now in the boat. And so Michael and Josiah were actually starting to feel pretty good about this particular trip. And so Michael decided he would go back down one more time and try to get just a few more lobsters before they called it a day. And so Josiah remembers watching Michael, who was in the water, as he put his mouthpiece back in. He signaled up to Josiah that he was good to go, and Josiah watched as he disappeared below the surface. The water was very calm, and Josiah is just kind of scanning out across the water, and then all of a sudden this eruption of white water came rushing up to the surface right where Michael had gone down below. And so right away, Josiah leaned out over the edge of the boat to see if he could look down and see his friend, but he didn't see Michael anywhere. Instead, he saw something massive moving around underneath them. After Michael had broken the surface on this final dive down to get more lobsters, his plan was to sink down to the bottom of the ocean at about 60 feet and then go hunting for lobsters. But when he had descended to about 45 feet, he felt something smash into him from behind that felt like a truck hitting him, and then everything around him went totally pitch black. The impact of whatever it was that hit him had caused his mouthpiece to get blown out of his mouth. So he doesn't have air, and he starts fumbling around to find his mouthpiece, but he can't find it. And as he's fumbling around, his hands are making contact with what feels like walls all around him. He was inside of an enclosed space. But when he had touched these walls, they were not normal walls. They were soft, but they were hard at the same time, and they seemed to be moving, like they were pulsating or quivering. The space he was in was fairly large, and it was not completely flooded with water. It was like Michael had slipped into this air pocket. But this air pocket was not stationary. It was moving, and pretty fast, because the water that was...
This man got swallowed by a whale. This man got swallowed up by a whale.
was inside of it was violently sloshing all around. Michael could hear it slapping up against the walls. As Michael continued to panic and fumble around for his mouthpiece, he started to notice intense pressure on his legs, but he had no idea what was causing it, and because it's pitch black, he couldn't see what it was. Finally, Michael found the line that was connected to his mouthpiece. He jammed it in his mouth and he took a long inhale, and now that he could breathe again, he had this horrifying thought. Have I been swallowed by a shark? He instinctively began feeling around for the shark's teeth, but there were no teeth inside of this space. Instead, it was just these walls that continued to shift and move all around him, and that's when it dawned on him. He had been swallowed, but not by a shark. He had been swallowed by a whale. For nearly 45 seconds, Michael was trapped inside the closed mouth of a humpback whale. Despite their enormous size, they can be up to 60 feet long and weigh up to 70,000 pounds, they only eat small fish. So when this particular whale realized Michael was not a tiny fish, it began violently swinging its head side to side to try to dislodge Michael, and that caused that eruption of white water to go to the surface that Josiah saw. And after a few good shakes, Michael was spat out of this whale's mouth. Michael remembers suddenly being in the open water with enough light coming down that he could see around him. The water was very turbulent and churning, and he recalled as he made his way to the surface, looking straight down and seeing the tail fin of this enormous whale swimming away from him. Michael made his way to the surface and he flagged down Josiah, who boated over to him. He pulled him back into the boat, and Michael, who was totally traumatized by what happened, could only say to Josiah that he was inside of it and that it tried to eat him. After Josiah brought Michael back to shore and called the authorities, Michael was rushed to a hospital where he was evaluated, and unbelievably, he suffered really no injuries. He had some significant bruising to his legs where the whale had actually clamped down on him. That was the pressure he felt in his legs. The mouth of the whale was closing on his legs. But besides that, there really wasn't any other injuries. And so later that day, he was discharged. It's believed the whale was a juvenile that had been seen in the area that was about 30 to 35 feet long, and that had just accidentally scooped Michael up. The whale was certainly not trying to hurt Michael. Whales, especially humpback whales, are not in the business of hurting people. No. But in this exchange with Michael, Michael could have very easily died. He could have drowned or suffocated inside the mouth of this whale, or he could have just died from blunt force trauma. Yep. But luckily he didn't.
Exactly. It could have been really, really bad, but luckily it didn't. And yes, that was a 1 in 1 trillion chance of happening, because whales, humpback whales in particular, do not like humans. They don't eat humans. They eat very, very small fish. Very, very small fish. Wow. Now, killer whales, that's another story.
Despite how terrifying this incident sounds, Michael was incredibly casual in all of his interviews about this. Wow. He just kind of acted like, man, these things kind of happen, you know, whales come out of nowhere, they just scoop you up, you know, it happens. And he would tell the incredulous reporters who just could not believe this guy was real that as soon as he was better, he was getting back in the water and going lobster diving.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah.
So that's going to do it, guys. If you found the secret in today's episode, let us know in the comment section what it is and where you found it, so give us the timestamp. And if you're the first to do that, we'll pin you at the top of the comment section. If you got something out of...
Yo, that dude really does have all the luck. Who said that? Christopher, you're right. That guy has all the luck. Woo! Man. Yeah, we got one more Mr. Ballin video. This is crazy, man. This is crazy. All right, this one right here is titled "The Bravest Kid in America." Let's see what this is about. Let's go.
As you listen to today's absolutely epic story, remember the main character was a child when all of this happened. A child. But before we get into today's story, if you're a fan of the strange, dark, and mysterious delivered in story format, then you've come to the right channel, because that's all we do, and we upload 2 or 3 times every week. So if that's of interest to you, please continuously maneuver your vehicle right in front of the like button's car on the highway, and then turn on your blinker, but don't change lanes. Also, please subscribe to our channel and turn on all notifications so you don't miss any of our weekly uploads. All right, let's get into today's story. In 1937, the Japanese declared war on China and invaded their country. The United States, who was friends with China, initially did not intervene in fear of provoking Japan. But after the Japanese murdered hundreds of thousands of unarmed Chinese civilians and the Japanese attacked an American warship, the United States was forced to step in. American officials responded to the Japanese aggression by placing serious economic sanctions and trade embargoes on Japan, believing this would cripple their war efforts in China, causing them to have to retreat. However, these sanctions and embargoes did not have this effect. Instead, they just angered Japan and made them even more determined to hold their ground in China. Over the next few years, the United States and Japan attempted to negotiate some sort of settlement, but neither side would make any concessions, and so neither side would budge. A few years later, on the morning of Sunday, December 7th, 1941, the Japanese launched a surprise aerial attack on the American military base in Pearl Harbor, Hawaii. After the 2-hour attack was done, over 2,400 Americans were killed, with another 1,000 wounded, and 300 airplanes and 20 ships were either destroyed or significantly crippled. The Japanese had hoped this attack would goad the United States into lifting the sanctions and embargoes they had placed on them from back in 1937. But instead, all the Japanese did was goad the United States into all-out war with them. One day after the Japanese attack on Pearl Harbor, the United States officially declared war on Japan, thus entering World War II. On the day the Japanese bombed Pearl Harbor, Jack Lucas, like every other American in the country, was glued to his radio listening to the news. He was devastated and shocked at this carnage he was hearing about in Hawaii. And so by the time the President of the United States was declaring war on Japan, Jack had already made up his mind that he was going to join up and he was going to fight for his country. However, there was an issue. Jack wasn't old enough to join the military. You needed to be 17 years old, and Jack was only 14. But this was not going to stop Jack. So he created this fake document that said he was 17 years old, and he forged his mother's signature on it. And then, after bribing him, he got a notary to sign off on this document as well. And so Jack took his forged documentation, he gave it to the recruiter, and before long, Jack was accepted into the armed services and was on his way to Marine Corps boot camp. After completing initial training and becoming a Marine, the Marines found out Jack's paperwork was actually faked. But instead of kicking him out of the military, they said, Jack, you can stay in, but under one condition. You can't go overseas to combat. You have to stay in the United States. You can drive a truck and help out around here, but you can't deploy and go to war until you're of age. Jack was not happy about this, but initially he did as he was told, and he did just drive a truck around and support it as best as he could. But after about 1.5 years, 2 years of this, Jack just couldn't do it anymore. That was not why he had forged this document to get into the military. He had done that so he could actually go fight in the war. And so finally, when he was just 16 years old, he abandoned his post and snuck onto the back car of a troop transport train that was going to another military base. And so when he arrived at this base, which was in California, he hopped off and then ran to the docks where there were these big warships.
Yo, they should make a movie out of this kid, bro.
And he saw one of them, there was a whole bunch of troops loading onto it. And he figured, that's where I need to go. And so he snuck onto the ship and he hid down below. And then after the ship took off and was out to sea, he revealed himself. And he walked up to a Marine officer and he kind of played off the, oh, I must have got on the wrong ship, but now that I'm here, can I join your unit? And this officer, who had no idea how young Jack was, eventually said, okay, but prepare yourself because we're going to invade Iwo Jima. Now, Jack had never heard of Iwo Jima and did not know its significance. But frankly, Jack didn't really care. He was just glad that he was actually going to see combat. What Jack couldn't have known, and what the other Marines on this ship couldn't have known
Yeah, we got 1,500 people in the Mr. Ballin' Live reaction, baby.
either, is that the battle for Iwo Jima would become one of the bloodiest and deadliest battles of the entire war. The Japanese that were on this island defending it were absolutely fearless and would not surrender despite being outnumbered, and they were heavily entrenched in these caves and tunnels built in all over the island, and they rarely left these caves and tunnels, which meant Jack and the other Marines, when they landed on this island, the only way they could fight the Japanese was by literally crawling down into these tunnels, which were usually booby-trapped, and fighting up close and personal with the enemy. Jack's ship arrived off the coast of Iwo Jima in February of 1945 when Jack was still 16 years old. On February 19th, the first wave of Marines climbed down the side of this big ship down onto these smaller amphibious landing crafts, and then one by one they began making their way towards Iwo Jima to begin the invasion. Jack was not part of this initial invasion. He would be going out on day 2 with the second wave of Marines. And so Jack and all the other second wave Marines just stood at the front of the ship and watched as these amphibious crafts made it up to the beach and then just got completely gunned down by Japanese machine gunners that were lining the beach.
I couldn't imagine, man. I couldn't imagine being a 16-year-old boy about to go out here and get shot at.
And so by the second day, when Jack and the rest of the Marines are getting ready to launch their assault, there are literally thousands of dead Americans just lining the beach. But Jack and the other second wave Marines, they knew this was their job, this was their duty, and so they were undeterred. They climbed down the side of the ship, they boarded their amphibious landing craft, and began the journey towards the island. As they got closer, the Japanese machine gunners opened fire not only on Jack and the boat he was in, but all of the crews that were coming towards the beach. And so hundreds of Americans were just getting gunned down before they even reached the sand. Jack and his crew managed to get to the beach, and so as the gate dropped on their boat, and as Jack is running onto the beach, the men around him are just getting cut to pieces by these machine guns.
Crazy.
Jack manages not to get shot, and he, along with 3 other Marines, run up the beach and they lay down in front of the sand dune that
Exactly what I would have done.
protected them from these machine gunners. Jack knew he couldn't stay there for very long because the Japanese were also firing artillery shells onto the beach, and so it would just be a matter of time before he was blown up. And so Jack and these other 3 Marines that had arrived at the same time, they began moving north to
Dude, come on now. There has to be a movie of this. There has to be a movie of this.
doing their best not to get shot or blown up, stopping behind rocks and trees and jumping behind sand dunes. And after a couple hours of doing this, the 4 of them reached the airfield at the northern end of the island. And when they get there, a machine gunner inside of a pillbox. A pillbox is like a small concrete fort that only has openings on 3 or 4 of its sides that are just big enough for a machine gun to poke through. A machine gunner inside one of these pillboxes notices Jack and the other 3 Marines, and they open fire on them. And somehow, Jack and these other 3 Marines managed to not get shot and were able to maneuver and then fire through one of those openings and take out the machine gunner inside.
That's crazy. That's crazy. What? Maxine Miller, thank you for the $3 dono. Appreciate you. That is insane. Sabrine, thank you. Nando, thank you for becoming a channel member. Sabrine, thank you for the $20 dono.
And so now that this gunner is down, Jack and the others see the opportunity to run forward and take more ground of this airfield. And as they're running, other Japanese soldiers in the general vicinity, they see them, they start opening up on them from other pillboxes and other locations, and it forces Jack and these Marines to just jump into the nearest trench to avoid getting shot. And so they're jumping into a Japanese trench, which is a deep hole dug in the ground to protect yourself from getting shot. And as they jump in there, they're expecting to see Japanese soldiers coming towards them, but there weren't any soldiers. But they knew they couldn't stay there for very long because eventually Japanese soldiers would come through here and then they'd get killed. And so they quickly decided their best bet was to basically get out of this trench and run towards the pillbox where they knew they had taken out the machine gunner inside, so they could actually take...
What movie is this? I'm familiar with both of these actors, and I could see this guy acting in a movie like this. I don't know their names, but I've seen them in many things before.
They knew they had taken out the machine gunner inside, so they could actually take that pillbox for themselves. And so their plan was they would run towards it and stop inside of each of the trenches along the way to protect themselves because they know there are other Japanese that know where they are. And then once they get to the pillbox, they can regroup and call in reinforcements. And so
That's what I would have wanted to do too, was to get to that pillbox. When they first mentioned the pillbox, that was the first thing that I thought was that they were going to try to get to a pillbox. I wasn't expecting for machine guns to be poking out of them, trying to shoot them down.
The men Jack was with said, okay, I'll go first. And so he...
That was Saving Private Ryan, Heather. Thank you.
Climbs out of his trench.
I've never seen that movie. I've heard of it a million times.
As the
Clarissa, thank you. New channel member, baby. I've seen you in the chat a few times.
Because they know there are other Japanese that know where they are. And then once they get to the pillbox, they can regroup and call in reinforcements. And so one of the men Jack was with said, okay, I'll go first. And so he climbs out of his trench as the Japanese are shooting at him, and he sprints about 10 or 15 feet until he gets to the next trench on the way to this pillbox. And so Jack is watching as this guy jumps into this trench, and as soon as he disappears out of view, this Marine is immediately turning around and scrambling to get back out of the trench, and he's trying to run back towards Jack and the other 2 Marines he was with. It would turn out this guy had jumped into another Japanese trench that was full of Japanese soldiers. He'd actually landed on top of an actual
heck no.
soldier. But these Japanese soldiers were so caught off guard by this, they didn't have time to react and shoot this Marine before the Marine was able to scramble out and get back to Jack and the others.
That's crazy.
And then for the next several minutes, Jack and these other 3 Marines opened fire on these Japanese soldiers in this trench like...
Yo, is this a movie, man? Because that part sounds so familiar. Lamberto? Is that how you say it? Thank you for the $5 dono. But that part sounds so familiar, where he jumped into a trench, and it just so happened to have a bunch of these Japanese in there, and they couldn't react fast enough to shoot him, so he was able to scurry out of there and go back to his boys, and they shoot at him. What? That sounds familiar. Oh, look, I paused it and found Freddy Krueger. I found Freddy Krueger.
10 or 15 feet away, and these Japanese soldiers, they too opened fire on Jack and the other 3. Jack was able to take out 2 of the Japanese soldiers before his gun jammed, and so he ducked down into the trench to work on his gun, and as he's down there, he notices there are 2 grenades on the ground right next to him. And so without any hesitation, he yells, "Grenade!" to the other Marines, and then he jumps on top of them, smothering the grenades with his body. One of the grenades was a dud, and so it didn't explode. The other was not a dud, and it went off. The way a grenade works is there is a small piece of explosive that is inside of metal housing that's usually spherical, and this metal housing is the thing you actually hold on to and throw when you throw a grenade. And so when this small explosive is triggered by pulling the pin and releasing the spoon, it detonates and it causes the metal housing itself to be ripped apart and sent flying. Basically, when a grenade goes off, it's like having hundreds of pieces of jagged metal shot off in every direction that are all traveling roughly at the speed of a bullet or faster. And so naturally, a grenade up close is incredibly lethal. In fact, the kill radius of a typical fragmentation grenade is about 5 meters. When the grenade under Jack...
16 feet? Woo! You don't want to be nowhere near a daggone grenade, man. Goodness gracious.
That was not a dud exploded. It sent Jack flying into the air, and then when he came back down again, his comrades saw him, and they could see he was clearly devastated from all the fragmentation that had been pumped into his body, and so they assumed he was dead. But even if they thought he was alive for some reason, there was nothing they could have done to have helped him, because they were actively being engaged by dozens of Japanese soldiers that were only about 10 or 15 feet away. And so eventually, these 3 other Marines that Jack had just saved were forced to leave Jack where he was and retreat back to the beach, and they would all live. The Japanese soldiers in the trench that they were fighting against would eventually come into Jack's trench, but most likely when they saw Jack laying there just completely ruined from this grenade, they assumed he was dead, and so they just kind of left him there. But Jack wasn't dead. He just couldn't speak, and he couldn't see anything, and he really couldn't move, although he could wiggle a few fingers on his left hand. And so for hours, as he lay there in agonizing pain, in and out of consciousness, he just wiggled the fingers on his left hand, hoping an American would see him and know he was still alive. And you gotta figure, this whole time, it is just constant chaos all around him.
That is insane. I couldn't imagine. I could not imagine. Raphael, yeah, I know. I've came across some of those videos, and I do plan on reacting to them. Thank you for the $5 dono. Super Demand 51, thank you, new channel member, baby.
Chances of survival are incredibly slim. The idea that an American is going to find him and be able to evacuate him is almost zero, and he must have known that.
Yep.
But by some miracle, eventually another American unit did find their way into Jack's trench, and they did notice him wiggling the fingers on his left hand. And so they were able to evacuate him from the trench down to the beach.
Crazy.
And from there, under the cover of darkness, they were able to bring him out to a hospital boat offshore. And there he would begin the first of 26 major surgeries to remove the grenade shrapnel from his torso, his arm, and his face.
Ooh-hoo-wee. This man put himself over a freaking grenade and took it. Oh my God. Woo.
Despite his grievous injuries, Jack would surprisingly make a full recovery. And 8 months after his injury, the President of the United States would award him the highest decoration for bravery, the Medal of Honor. He would be the youngest recipient of this award since the 1800s, and to this day, he is one of only a handful of miners to have won this award.
Wow. That's crazy. He went to the war 16 years old. This happened to him and he was still able to survive.
Following his departure from the military, Jack would survive a near-death experience while skydiving when both of his parachutes, his main and his reserve, failed, and he just smashed into the ground.
He smashed it to the ground. Oh, heck nah.
But somehow lived. He would also survive a very bad house fire, and he would survive an assassination attempt on his life.
Dang, this fool was a lucky mofo for real. He had all kinds of stuff happening to him, man. Goodness gracious. Ryan, thank you for the $10 dono. Hacksaw Ridge, King Cole, 3X. I don't know what that is, my brother.
By his ex-wife. And so naturally, he titled his memoir Indestructible. Jack would eventually die of natural causes on June 5th, 2008. He was 80 years old. So that's going to do it, guys. If you found...
Dang, he lived to be 82. Goodness gracious, yo, he lived a long life. Shout out to him, man. Wow, that is the true story of a soldier right there. That's crazy. I mean, it's not that everybody else's story is irrelevant, but I mean, not irrelevant, but don't hold as much precedence. But at the same time, his story is so unique, and for him to live to 80 years old, look at him. He still looked the same. I've heard about this man. I've seen this face before. Wow.
So that's going to do it, guys. If you found the secret in today's episode, let us know in the comments.
I did. I saw it, Freddy Cougar. Yeah, this is crazy. This was crazy. I got a question for y'all, though. Should I do another one? Should I do another Mr. Baller reaction? I said we was going to do 2 tonight. But we ain't even hit the hour mark. If y'all want me to do another one, I need y'all to put in the chat right now, my channel members, one more. I need one more. And on top of that, if you can type one more, you can hit that like button for your boy too. I need y'all to hit that like button. For everybody that's not channel members that are sitting here just watching, I need y'all to hit that like button for your boy so we can do one more of these. Who is this? Thank you so much for the $20. Don't know. Appreciate you. Who's that? Dorth? Is it Dortha? Is it Dorothy? I don't see the rest. But thank you for the $20. Don't know. Appreciate you. Thanks for being you. Hold on. Hold on. What we got going on here? What do we have going on here? Hold on, y'all. Bear with me a moment. It's some activities. It's some activities going on here. Chris Chapman, thank you, brother, for the dono. Shows photos, thank you as well. Josh McGee, appreciate you. Yes, sir. Yeah, they're saying yes. They're saying one more. We're going to get one more Mr. Ballin' reaction. Make sure y'all hitting that like button for your boy, for the YouTube algorithm, trying to get to 1 million subscribers by next month. And I think we could do it. But that like button is what's going to get us there. It's going to get us there. Brandy, thank you for the $10 dono. It is much appreciated. We got some new channel members in here. Jay, so high, thank you. New channel member. Appreciate you so much. Sabrina back with another one. One more, had a long day. I got you, baby. We're going to take care of you. And thank you for taking care of me with that $50 dono. Let's get to it, y'all. Next, Mr. Ballin' video is, oh wait, hold on, this looks crazy. And it's the longest one yet. This sociopath finally got caught. Strange but true, part 15. Let's check it out.
Sometimes the truth is stranger than fiction, and today we're going to look at 3 stories that demonstrate that. But before we get into today's stories, if you're a fan...
Oh, so the movie may be Hacksaw Ridge. Good to know. 3X's on YouTube. Scary videos. All right, I'm going to have to see what's up with them one of these days. Loving you and your content. Thank you so much. I just read off 3 $5 donos. Appreciate y'all so much.
And of the strange, dark, and mysterious delivered in story format, then you've come to the right channel because that's all we do, and we upload 2 or 3 times every week. So if that's of interest to you, please invite the like button to come to the cinema with you to see a movie they really want to see, but then proceed to talk incessantly to them throughout the entire movie, and about halfway through, spoil the ending. Also, please subscribe to our channel and turn on all notifications so you don't miss any of our weekly uploads. All right, let's get into today's stories. In October of 2014, a 35-year-old woman, who we'll call Olivia, met her husband for lunch at a restaurant in Western New York. The couple had not originally planned to stay at this restaurant for very long, but one thing led to another. They were having a nice time, and before long, it was 6 p.m., and they had been there for 6 hours. And over those 6 hours, both of them had had a lot to eat, lots of bread and pasta and cakes and all sorts of stuff, and they had had some alcohol, but not very much. Olivia had been careful to only have 4 drinks over those 6 hours because she wanted to be able to drive. And her husband similarly limited his drinking so he'd be safe to drive. And so after they got the check and they paid for their meal, they both hopped in their respective cars and they began driving home. As Olivia was making her way home, she unfortunately got a flat tire, and so she pulled off to the side of the road and she called roadside assistance. As she was waiting for help to show up, another motorist happened to drive by and they misunderstood what was happening. They saw Olivia standing outside of her car with the tire popped off, and they thought she'd been in an accident. And so they called the police and reported it. And so the police show up a few minutes later, they pull up right behind Olivia, and when they get out, they ask her, are you okay? Do you need any help? And she would say, oh no, I just had a flat tire, I'm totally fine, thank you for stopping though. But the police, as they're listening to her speak, they see her eyes look kind of glassy and glazed over like she's drunk, and as she was speaking, they could have sworn she was slurring her words. And so they said, hey ma'am, have you been drinking tonight? And
see, man, that's not fair, man, because if a cop pulls me over and it's late, I'm going to look how I look right now. I'm a little tired. I'm a little bit sleepy right now, right? And I slur my words because I have a speech impediment. That's messed up.
She would tell them that, well, yeah, I have had a few drinks, but only 4 over the last...
Only 4? You intoxicated, woman.
6 hours, and I don't feel drunk at all. That has nothing to do with the situation I'm in now. I'm not drunk. But the police were not buying it, and so they put her through a series of field sobriety tests that she managed to get through, but she struggled with enough that it sent up some red flags. And so they made her blow into a breathalyzer. A breathalyzer is a device that uses your breath to register how much alcohol is in your system, also known as your blood alcohol content, or BAC for short. BAC is scored as a percentage out of 100. And while no one should ever get behind the wheel of a vehicle if they are impaired, it is the case that in America, you are allowed legally to operate a vehicle if your BAC is 0.08% or lower. For reference, if a 160-pound female consumed about 3 alcoholic drinks, maybe a little bit more, in the course of an hour, she would most likely have a 0.08% BAC. If that same 160-pound female were to consume, let's say, 8 alcoholic drinks over the course of an hour, she would definitely not be allowed to legally operate a vehicle.
Precisely. Clarissa, thank you, sweetheart. Hey, I try, baby. I try. The best I can do is try.
Because she would be very, very drunk. Her BAC would have spiked to 0.2%, which would put her in the range where she would most likely have alcohol poisoning, and eventually she would most likely lose consciousness. If this same 160-pound female were to consume 13 alcoholic drinks over the course of an hour, her BAC would jump all the way up to 0.4%, where she's not just drunk and unable to operate a vehicle. At that level, you're talking about potentially dying from consuming that much alcohol.
Crazy.
When Olivia blew into this breathalyzer, she fully expected that she would be below the 0.08% legal limit. Because after all, she'd only had 4 alcoholic drinks over a 6-hour period, and so that would put her well below that legal limit. But that was not the case. She blew a staggering 0.33%. The cops couldn't believe what they were looking at, because they're looking at Olivia and they're thinking, at that level, she should be somewhere between losing consciousness and dying, but here she is just standing there talking to us, acting a little bit buzzed. And so they assumed their breathalyzer must have made a mistake, so they went back into their car, got another breathalyzer, did it again, and again, Olivia blew a 0.33% BAC.
I wonder what this means. Ooh, this is about to be juicy.
The officers couldn't understand how this woman had such an extreme alcohol tolerance, but regardless, they charged her with driving while intoxicated and then brought her to the hospital for medical intervention. There, her BAC remained high even after a full day had passed without her consuming any more alcohol. This is around the time that it was discovered that Olivia had a very, very rare medical condition called auto-brewery syndrome, which in a nutshell meant her body transformed glucose from foods, specifically carbs like bread, pasta, that kind of thing, into alcohol. Olivia, who was totally unaware of this condition, had developed this wicked alcohol tolerance because she was basically drunk all the time. Not because...
Yo, that's crazy. Her body turned carbs into liquor, basically beer. And she wasn't aware that oh my God, what? She had this high tolerance to alcohol because she was drunk all the time. She lived a drunk life. This woman didn't even have to drink to get drunk. She was always drunk. I know some of y'all are probably thinking, wow, that's amazing. I wish I was her. But no, that's crazy. Like, her blood alcohol freaking index or whatever it's called is to the point where some people will be unconscious or dead. What?
Because she was a heavy drinker, but because she ate carbs. This condition, if left untreated, can do the same damage alcoholism and binge drinking can do to the body.
Oh, really? Yeah, then definitely need to be treated then. Heather, I'm so glad to hear that, baby. Keep it going. Keep it strong. We in here. Get it.
The only way you can treat it is by drastically changing your diet. When Olivia's condition was discovered and made public, the charges against her were dropped, and she would go on to just stop eating carbs altogether.
Dang, I wish I could stop eating carbs. I'm trying. I'm really trying.
In 1887, 35-year-old Robert Ledru was a very talented detective working in Paris, France. He was so talented that periodically he would get called upon by other police departments around the country to help them solve their most difficult cases. And so that year, there was this coastal town in northern France that had this string of sailors that went missing, and nobody had the slightest idea what had happened to them. And so naturally, Robert was called in to investigate. The night Robert arrived,
Mash boom. You don't get it, brother. You don't get it. It ain't about the reaction, bro. Learn something. Peace.
In this town, it was very late and Robert was tired, so he went straight to his hotel and he went to bed. The following morning, he got up and he went straight to the local police department to meet the local officers that he would be working with on this investigation. But when he got there, he was told that the missing sailors case had been lowered in priority because during the night, a murder had been committed down on their beach. And so that was now their main focus. And so they apologized to Robert and said, I'm sorry you came all this way for nothing. But since you're here, do you want to help us in this beach murder investigation? And Robert said, sure. The victim was a middle-aged man named Andre Monet who owned a dress shop in Paris, France. He had recently moved to this coastal town to enjoy the beautiful scenery. When his body was discovered early that morning, it was quickly determined he had been killed by a single gunshot wound to the chest, where the bullet actually went clear through him out the other side, but they hadn't found the bullet. There were no suspects, there were no leads, there was no clear motive. However, they were able to rule out robbery because there was still money in Andre's pockets. And so Robert and the other local officers left the police station and made their way down to the beach, where they began examining the area where Andre had been found. The local officers focused on looking for the bullet, while Robert decided to walk a little ways down the beach to see if there was any evidence that had been overlooked in the initial search. And after only walking a very short distance, Robert noticed some barely visible footprints that appeared to pass right by where Andre's body had been found. And these footprints, they continued past that area and then up a flight of stairs up onto the road where they disappeared. Robert called over the other officers and told them to make plaster casts of these footprints so he could analyze them. What that meant is the officers would literally just pour liquid plaster inside of these prints, and then when they dried, they would pull that plaster out, and it would literally be a 3D model of
Yo, that is so dope.
the foot that had made the prints. And so as the officers are working on these casts, Robert says to one of the officers that these prints looked really odd to him, like they were familiar in some way, but he just couldn't place where he had seen them before. Less than an hour later, when the plaster had dried, the officers pulled them out and they handed them to Robert, and as soon as Robert looked at them, he physically reacted to what he was seeing. It was like he was disappointed. And then without saying anything, he just walked down the beach with these plaster casts until he got to this secluded area where he sat down. And he sat there for hours and hours, just staring at the plaster casts, seemingly unaffected by the sun that was blazing down on him the whole time and the tide that was very quickly creeping up on him. The local officers who were watching this, they didn't know anything about Robert. All they knew is his reputation, which is he is this totally legendary detective, and so they didn't dare question his methods, even though this seemed really odd what he was doing. Finally, by mid-afternoon, Robert would put the cast down, he would stand up, and he would walk back over to the mystified local officers. And when he walked up to them, he would say, "There's no reason to stay at the beach any longer or interview any more witnesses. I think I've solved the case." But then instead of elaborating, he just turned around and walked up off the beach and headed back for his hotel. The local officers just looked at each other and shrugged, and they left too.
What?
Early the next day, the bullet that had killed Andre Monet was found on the beach. And so when Robert showed up to the beach, the chief of police handed him this bullet in an effort to help him continue the investigation. And as soon as Robert looked at
What? I'm trying to get my weight off too, Artofkickz. Brandy, we got this, baby. We gonna make it happen. Say you're not gonna be here, Miss McGee. That's all good, baby. Enjoy your vacay. You know I'm gonna be here. Brandy, another one. Thank you, baby.
he sighed and said, "Okay, now I know for sure what happened." And then Robert proceeded to break down the murder. He said the killer woke up in the middle of the night on the night that Andre was killed, and he got out of his bed, he put on his clothes, and then he headed down to the beach. There, he encountered Andre Monet, a man he didn't know, who was most likely out for a midnight stroll as well. The two men struck up a friendly conversation, but at some point it turned into some sort of quarrel, at which point the killer drew his pistol, shot Andre in the chest, and then fled the scene. Robert told the local police chief that the reason he knew all these details is because he had been the killer. He killed Andre Monet. But he didn't do it on purpose, and he didn't remember, because he killed Andre Monet while he was sleepwalking. He told the chief when he was given those plaster casts of those footprints, he knew immediately why he thought those prints looked so familiar. Because as soon as he looked at the casts, he could tell whoever had made the prints was missing a toe, and as it happened, Robert was missing a toe. So those prints looked exactly like his footprints. And that morning, when he had woken up in his hotel room before even going down to the beach, he had noticed that his shoes and his socks, which were next to his bed, were sandy and damp. And he...
Wow. This seemed like something from a TV show. Here you have this world-renowned famous investigator. He shows up to a crime scene. He's like, these footprints look familiar. Interesting. Go ahead and give me the cast of that. He walks down to the other side of the beach, sit down for a few hours just analyzing it. And he's like, I solved the mystery. He did it in his sleep. He sleepwalked, shot this man, and killed him. Hey, he was honest to tell, hey, look, you guys, I know who did it. Yeah, it was me. It was me. Yeah, this is why.
thought that was so strange because he couldn't remember how they got that way, but he was too busy to investigate. And that night, after he had sat all day looking at the casts and then left the beach, leaving the local police officers totally mystified, he had gone back to his room, and the first thing he did was get his revolver out from under his pillow, and he discovered that one bullet was missing, and he always kept his revolver fully loaded. And so he spent the rest of the night trying to convince himself that this was just one big coincidence. But the following morning, when he was given that bullet, he knew immediately that this was not a coincidence.
Yeah.
The bullet that had killed Andre Monet was the same type of ammunition that he loaded his revolver with, and so he had to be the killer. He had effectively caught himself. The police were totally shocked and did not believe this at first. More specifically, they didn't want to believe that Robert, their star detective, was behind this horrible homicide. Yeah. But eventually, after examining all the evidence, they agreed he had to be the killer. But to test whether this really was sleepwalking and not some elaborate cover-up by Robert, they decided to conduct an experiment. Robert, who was fully cooperative with the investigation, was told to sleep in this jail cell where he would be monitored 24/7 by armed guards, and in this cell with him would be a revolver loaded with blank rounds, and he was told to keep it under his pillow. For the first couple of days, nothing happened. Robert never touched the revolver during the day or when he was asleep. But about a week into this experiment, Robert suddenly woke up in the middle of the night in this trance-like state. He reached under his pillow, pulled out the revolver, and began firing at the guards right outside of the cell. And so this convinced the police that Robert had been telling the truth about what happened to Andre Monet. He really had killed him while he was sleepwalking. A decision was made not to prosecute Robert for the murder. Instead, they decided to basically exile him for everybody's protection. And so from then until 1937, when Robert died, he was forced to live alone on this secluded farm outside of Paris, where the only visitors he ever got were doctors who would only show up during the day and with armed bodyguards.
Oh my God. I was wondering. I was like, what? They put this man in a jail cell? And they find out a week later that he did it because he got up and shot some blank rounds at the guards. What? That don't sound like the way that they should find out if this man was a sleepwalker or not. This happened in the 1930s. They don't have the technology we have today. They put this man in this small house, secluded from everyone, and no one could visit him but the doctors, and they had to be armed or what? Oh my God, poor guy. That was not fair. That was not at all how this situation was supposed to be handled.
On December 18th, 1956, a brand new game show called To Tell the Truth aired on a major American television network. The premise of the show was relatively simple. 4 celebrity judges would be presented with 3 people called contestants who all claimed to be the same person. And this person who they claimed to be was always remarkable in some way. They had some incredible talent or some crazy job, or they had accomplished something extraordinary. One of these 3 contestants was the real person they were claiming to be. Yeah. The other 2 people were doing their best to pretend to be that person. And it was the job of the celebrity judges to try to figure out who was telling the truth. So for a set amount of time on the show, the celebrity judges would ask the contestants questions about their background and try to figure out, who was who, and then at the end.
This type of TV show makes perfect sense. It makes perfect sense. It's almost like, dang, I can't think of the name of the show.
End of the time, the celebrities would cast a vote about who they thought was the real remarkable person. After the votes were tallied up, the host would have the real remarkable person stand up to reveal themselves, and the entire audience would go crazy, and that was the show. And the show became quite popular. So popular, in fact, that today, nearly 70 years later, it's still on the air. And over this show's very long history...
Oh, yeah. See, I knew this show was still like a thing.
Virtually all the episodes are pretty similar. It's a pretty redundant show. But there is one episode that will forever go down.
There's a YouTube channel or another type of TV show that's the exact same thing. I'm trying to unzip the bottom of my pants. I'm getting hot in here. But there's another type of show that's the exact same thing that I've seen on like YouTube recently.
As the most unique. In October of 1972, 3 contestants walked out onto the stage in front of the 4 celebrity judges, and they all introduced themselves as Ed Edwards. Then the host of the show read aloud the biography of the real Ed Edwards, and he would say that Ed at one point was on the FBI's list of the top 10 most wanted criminals in America for crimes like armed robbery and impersonating a federal officer. And then after he was finally caught by law enforcement and went to prison, a prison guard helped him turn his life around. And then upon release from prison 14 years later, Ed remained this reformed criminal and became a successful author and motivational speaker who specialized in telling people how to identify con men and criminals and how to protect themselves from these people.
Okay.
After the real Ed Edwards biography was read aloud, the 3 contestants sat down and the celebrity judges began asking them questions about their past. And then after the time was up, the celebrities cast their votes, and then the real Ed Edwards was revealed. And even though 2 of the 4 celebrity judges had correctly identified the right Ed Edwards, the crowd was totally astonished at who this guy actually was, because he did not look like this ex-convict. He looked like this kind of all-American, middle-aged father who was totally harmless and wouldn't hurt a fly. But either way, the show ended, and then the world forgot about Ed Edwards until 2009. That year, Ed's estranged daughter, 40-year-old April Blasio, finally decided to investigate something that had plagued her for her whole childhood. Despite her father's claims that he was this reformed criminal and this stand-up, law-abiding guy, she didn't believe it. She never believed it. She thought he had never been reformed and just was a criminal and always had been. Behind closed doors, Ed was violent and abusive, and he was a compulsive liar. She remembered in the 1970s and 80s when she was a young kid, Ed would make their family pack up and move, sometimes in the middle of the night, and April always assumed it was because her dad was wrapped up in something criminal. But every time she asked him, he would say, "Oh, well, you know."
That's because he was. Come on now. He was definitely wrapped up in something criminal. And I'm not surprised for one bit that this man was still active, even though he was supposed to be reformed and wrote a book. I'm surprised he went as far as writing a book if he was really still active. It takes a lot to write a book.
You know, I was an informant when I was in jail, and I snitched on some people, and some of those people have figured out where we live, and so we got to move. April knew he was lying, but there was nothing she could do, and so they just kept on moving around. But she always thought something else was going on. So in 2009, when April is now this 40-year-old woman, she's laying in bed one night and finally says, "You know what? I'm just going to start Googling some stuff." So she hops on her laptop and she starts typing in the different names of towns that she and her family lived in as a kid. And then after she'd write the name of the town, she'd write unsolved mystery or unsolved crime, and she would see if anything popped up. And so,
Yo, no, she did it. That's a genius idea. Just randomly one day, just Google the information. Google the truth, baby. She was like, man, let me Google the times when I left, when my family had to pack up and leave this town, that town, this town. Let me see if there was any unsolved mysteries or crimes that occurred during those times, because they would be unsolved, because if my father really was up to no good, then we were able to get away. And he got away every single time.
So as she began looking, she found one in 1980. It was an unsolved murder in a town called Watertown, Wisconsin, that happened right around the time that her family very briefly lived in this town. There was this young teenage couple that had left this wedding, and they had driven down this dead-end road, and they were just kind of enjoying each other's company, when an unknown assailant who matched the description of Ed Edwards walked up to their car, broke in, shot them both to death, and then disappeared.
Why?
And so on a hunch, April called the Watertown Police Department the following day and told them that, "I think my father might have been responsible for this double homicide."
Oh, she a snitch. She a snitch and she'll have no proof.
It's just a hunch, but he matches the description. We were there in this very small window of time when it happened. And so the police said, "Okay, we'll go have a look." And so the Watertown police, they tracked down Ed Edwards, who was living in Kentucky at the time, and they got him to give them a DNA sample. And when they tested the DNA sample, it matched the samples that were taken at the crime scene in 1980. And so Ed Edwards, he was arrested and brought back to Wisconsin, and as soon as he was in custody, he confessed to the murder. And then he requested the death penalty. But but he was told the maximum punishment for this crime was life in prison. Ed didn't like this, and so he confessed to another double homicide from 1977 in Ohio, where he killed another teenage couple, thinking that would give him the death penalty.
Why is this man over here admitting to killing teenage? No, not even that. Why is he killing teenage couples, bro? This is messed up. Why? I don't understand it.
But through a loophole, they said, well, actually, that still won't get you the death penalty. You're still facing life in prison. And so frustrated, Ed revealed a third murder he had perpetrated in...
This is crazy, man. The daughter was able to pull up one. She was able to pull up one. She couldn't find evidence for the other ones. She couldn't find unsolved mysteries or murders or anything for the other incidents in the other towns. So she was able to get her father under a hunch, convicted of one crime, and they gave him life in prison, but he didn't want that. He preferred the death penalty. He was already older, health probably deteriorating. He was like, I don't want to spend the rest of my years in jail. Just take me out now. I've lived long enough. So he admits to these other crimes that he did. Oh my gosh.
1996, he had killed his own foster son for the insurance money. And so for this crime, he was eligible for capital punishment, and so he was sentenced to death.
There we go. There we go. This is crazy.
But he would die of natural causes 2 years later in 2011 before the state could execute him. Since his death, cold case investigators and members of his own family have theorized that Ed Edwards is almost certainly responsible for more killings beyond just the 5 he happened to confess to.
Yeah, I wouldn't be surprised at all. I mean, yes, you can't get justice for him. Technically, they didn't get justice for any of his crimes that he committed. Even the first one that his daughter was able to get him convicted for, because natural causes, he died before any of this stuff could really, see his way through. Dang, Clarissa, I see you, baby. Channel member, elite member now. Big baby. Big baby. Cowboy, yeah, baby, I appreciate you. We in here. We hanging out tonight. We about to get out of here in a minute. This video is almost over. I'm prolonging the inevitable. Melissa, thank you so much. New channel member, baby. Sabrina with the upgrade. I'll see you later. Y'all, this is... We got Drake. What up, Drake? I ain't no Drake watching my channel. Thank you for the $20 donut. Wow. Stephanie, I see you. New channel member, baby.
In fact, many people believe Ed Edwards could actually be the infamous Zodiac Killer, who's one of the nation's most notorious uncaught serial killers that killed 37 people in Northern California in the 1960s and 1970s.
Yo, that'd be crazy.
If this is true, then Ed Edwards did not become a killer after he was on that game show in 1972. No, when he showed up for that game show and stood in front of the audience and smiled and answered questions to the celebrity panelists, at that time, as you're watching him on TV, he would have already been a seasoned serial killer with dozens and dozens of victims. But
why? What in the world is wrong with people? Why are you out here taking people's lives? I don't understand. What sickness do you have? What illness do you have? Oh my God, that's crazy. Wow. And he looks so normal.
But Ed stopped confessing to murders after that third confession because he was just kind of using those murders as bargaining chips to get what he wanted, the death penalty. And once he got it, he went silent.
Yeah.
And now that he's dead, we're never going to get another confession out of him. And there's no proof connecting him to any unsolved murder cases. And so, unfortunately, it's unlikely we'll ever know the full extent of Ed's reign of terror.
Look at that man. Look at him. Insane. That's the real him. Out here, ooh. I wish he would have told every case, every incident, every murder. I wish he would have told it.
Wow. Know the full extent of Ed's reign of terror. So that's going to do it, guys. If you found the secret in today's episode, let us know in the comments section what it is and where you found it, so give us the timestamp. And if you're the first to do that, we'll pin you at the top of the comments section. If you got something out of today's episode and you haven't done this already, please invite the like button to go to the cinema with you to watch a movie that they really want to see, and then proceed to talk incessantly to them throughout the entire movie, and about halfway through, spoil the...
It's one thing for him to have just been this man of crime, you know, like he tried to make it out to be on this TV show, but his daughter thought otherwise. What? And he just would move his family. He would just pack them up and move them like it was nothing. Like he was just living this clean cut life, but he was out there doing some horrendous things. And I would have never guessed in a million years that there would have been 2 TV show serial killers. 2 of them. Yes, this was the second. Well, no, technically this was the first. If I remember correctly. Oh, well, it might have been the second. I don't remember which one came before the other. I know one of them was dated in the 70s. I don't remember when this TV show was dated. But 2 TV show serial killers, man. That's crazy. When I say TV show, I mean game show. 2 game show serial killers. Y'all, this was a wild episode, but man, I'm getting out of here. I'm getting super sleepy, but y'all know what time it is. If you like tonight's reactions, hit that like button, hit that subscribe button. Stay tuned for more. As always, the link to the originals will be down in the description box below. If you haven't already, make sure you follow your boy on the gram and Twitter at Artofkickz. Thank y'all again for hanging out. Your boy getting super tired. Terry Johnson, thank you so much. Drake, appreciate you yet again. For the don't know, Terry, for the channel member. But y'all, I'm out of here. Y'all have a great and blessed night, and I will catch y'all